Germany sent hundreds of trained intelligence operatives into enemy territory during World War II. But when the war ended, the men who had risked execution for the Third Reich faced a stark choice. Some were hanged in prison yards across Britain. Others became the foundation of America's Cold War espionage apparatus. The same skills that made them dangerous to the Allies in wartime made them invaluable assets when a new enemy emerged in Moscow. Before we go deeper into how this decision changed the war forever, make sure to subscribe for more history that actually happened. The story of what happened to German spies after 1945 is not a simple tale of justice served. It is a chronicle of moral compromise, strategic necessity, and the uncomfortable reality that intelligence wars do not end when armies lay down their weapons. The men who gathered secrets for Hitler's war machine did not vanish when Berlin fell. They dispersed into occupation zones, prison cells, courtrooms, and recruitment offices. Some paid with their lives. Others built new careers serving the very nations that had hunted them. The transformation happened quickly, driven by calculations that had nothing to do with the crimes these men had committed and everything to do with the geopolitical storm gathering over Europe. The German intelligence apparatus going into World War II was fractured and competitive. The Abwehr, military intelligence under Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, operated alongside the Sicherheitsdienst, the intelligence wing of the SS. The two organizations distrusted each other, competed for resources, and often withheld information. This internal rivalry weakened German intelligence from the start. The Abwehr recruited heavily from civilians, prioritizing quantity over quality. Training facilities operated in Hamburg, Brussels, and occupied territories across Europe. Agents learned Morse code, invisible ink techniques, sabotage methods, and cover identities. But the curriculum emphasized speed over thoroughness. By 1940, Germany was sending agents into Britain who could barely operate their radio equipment. The strategic doctrine driving German espionage assumed that infiltration would be straightforward. Nazi intelligence officers believed Britain was riddled with sympathizers, that anti-war sentiment would provide cover for agents, and that the British security apparatus was outdated. These assumptions proved catastrophically wrong. The Abwehr underestimated MI5's capability to monitor coastal entry points, intercept radio transmissions, and penetrate German networks before agents even left the continent. This miscalculation turned German intelligence operations in Britain into a systematic failure that would haunt the Reich throughout the war. The first German spies arrived in Britain by parachute and submarine in 1940. Their missions were straightforward: gather intelligence on military installations, report troop movements, identify bombing targets, and prepare for invasion. But British counterintelligence was waiting. MI5 had broken German codes and monitored Abwehr communications. When spies parachuted into English fields, Home Guard patrols found them within hours. When they landed by boat on remote beaches, coastal watchers reported them. Between 1940 and 1945, Germany sent approximately 115 agents into Britain. MI5 captured every single one. Not one successful German spy network operated on British soil throughout the entire war. The captured agents faced interrogation at Camp 020, a facility run by MI5 officer Robin Tin Eye Stevens. Stevens employed psychological pressure, not physical torture. He isolated prisoners, confronted them with evidence of their mission details, and made clear their options: cooperate or face trial under the Treachery Act of 1940. The Treachery Act carried a mandatory death sentence. Most agents chose cooperation. MI5 transformed captured spies into double agents, feeding false information back to Germany through their own radio sets. This became the double-cross system, one of the most successful counterintelligence operations in military history. The Germans never realized their entire spy network in Britain was controlled by the enemy. But not every captured agent agreed to cooperate. Those who refused faced swift prosecution. Between 1940 and 1946, British authorities executed 16 German spies under the Treachery Act. 9 were hanged at Wandsworth Prison, 7 were hanged at Pentonville Prison. Joseph Jacobs, captured with a broken ankle after parachuting into Huntingdonshire in 1941, was the only spy executed by firing squad at the Tower of London on August 15, 1941. The executions were conducted in secrecy. Families were not notified. Bodies were buried in unmarked graves. The British government released minimal information, maintaining operational security even as the war turned in the Allies' favor. Across the Atlantic, German intelligence attempted similar operations with even worse results. In June 1942, 8 German saboteurs landed on American beaches in Operation Pastorius. The mission aimed to destroy industrial targets, disrupt transportation infrastructure, and spread panic across the United States. The saboteurs carried explosives, timing devices, and forged documents. But within 2 weeks, all 8 were in FBI custody. One of the saboteurs, George Dash, betrayed the mission immediately after landing. By June 27, 1942, the FBI had arrested every member of the team without a single act of sabotage being carried out. A military tribunal tried them in secret. 6 received the death penalty and were executed by electric chair in Washington, D.C. on August 8, 1942. 2 received prison sentences for their cooperation. The failure exposed the Abwehr's inability to conduct sustained operations in the United States. While Allied counterintelligence systematically dismantled German spy networks, the Abwehr itself was collapsing from within. Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, who had led the Abwehr since 1935, had grown increasingly disillusioned with the Nazi regime. He permitted anti-Nazi officers to operate within his organization. Some Abwehr officers actively sabotaged operations, provided warnings to Allied intelligence, and protected resistance members. This was not a coordinated resistance movement. It was a collection of individual officers who saw the war as lost and Hitler as a disaster. But their actions contributed to the Abwehr's string of intelligence failures. In February 1944, Hitler dissolved the Abwehr entirely, transferring its functions to the Reich Security Main Office under SS control. Canaris was sidelined, investigated, and eventually arrested following the failed assassination attempt on Hitler in July 1944. On April 9, 1945, just weeks before Germany's surrender, Canaris was hanged at Flossenburg concentration camp for treason. When the war ended in May 1945, thousands of German intelligence personnel found themselves in Allied custody. The Nuremberg trials focused on high-ranking Nazi officials, military leaders, and those directly responsible for war crimes. Intelligence officers were not prominently featured in the main tribunal. Most Abwehr officers faced no formal prosecution at all. They were sorted into prisoner-of-war camps, interrogated for information about Soviet capabilities, and gradually released back into civilian life. The absence of a systematic accounting for intelligence personnel created an opportunity that American and British intelligence services quickly recognized. The Cold War transformed everything. By 1946, the wartime alliance between the United States and the Soviet Union had fractured. The Iron Curtain descended across Europe. Washington and London needed intelligence on Soviet military capabilities, political intentions, and nuclear programs. The problem was immediate. Western intelligence agencies had minimal networks inside Soviet-controlled territory. German intelligence officers, particularly those who had operated on the Eastern Front, possessed exactly what the Allies needed. They knew Soviet military organization, had run networks in Eastern Europe, and spoke Russian. Their Nazi affiliations became secondary considerations in the face of strategic necessity. The most significant recruitment was General Reinhard Gehlen. Gehlen had commanded foreign armies east. The Wehrmacht intelligence section focused on the Soviet Union. In May 1945, as Germany collapsed, Gehlen microfilmed his intelligence files, buried them in the Bavarian Alps, and surrendered to American forces. He offered a deal, his expertise and networks in exchange for American support. U.S. Army intelligence accepted. By 1946, Gehlen had established the Gehlen Organization, an intelligence network funded by the United States and staffed by former Wehrmacht and SS officers. The organization operated from a compound in Bavaria, running espionage operations throughout Soviet-occupied Eastern Europe. The Gehlen Organization employed at least 4,000 agents at its peak. It recruited heavily from former Nazi intelligence personnel, including officers from the Sicherheitsdienst and Gestapo. West German Chancellor Konrad Adenauer personally authorized the hiring of former SS counterintelligence officers in response to what he perceived as Soviet espionage flooding West Germany. The organization provided intelligence reports directly to the CIA, which took over its funding and oversight from U.S. Army intelligence in 1949. In 1956, the Gehlen Organization was formally transferred to West German government control and became the Bundesnachrichtendienst, the Federal Intelligence Service of West Germany. Gehlen served as its first director until his retirement in 1968. The Gehlen Organization's effectiveness remains disputed. It successfully penetrated some Eastern European networks and provided valuable intelligence on Soviet military deployments. But it was also heavily infiltrated by Soviet intelligence. Heinz Felfe, a former SS officer who became one of Gehlen's senior officers, was a Soviet mole for over a decade. He fed classified information to Moscow while simultaneously receiving promotions within the organization. When Felfe was finally arrested in 1961, the extent of Soviet penetration became clear. Critics argue that the Gehlen Organization's willingness to employ compromised ex-Nazis enabled this infiltration, undermining its entire intelligence value. Beyond Gehlen's network, hundreds of other German intelligence personnel found post-war employment with Allied services. Klaus Barbie, known as the Butcher of Lyon for his brutal interrogation methods while heading Gestapo operations in France, was recruited by U.S. Army Counterintelligence Corps in 1947. American officials knew about Barbie's war crimes, including the deportation of Jewish children and the torture of resistance members. But they valued his knowledge of French communist networks. When French authorities sought Barbie's extradition in 1949, American intelligence helped him escape through rat lines, covert networks that smuggled former Nazis to South America. Barbie arrived in Bolivia in 1951 under a false identity, where he lived openly for decades, working as a security advisor to Bolivian dictatorships. The rat lines were not exclusively American operations. The Vatican, through networks led by Croatian priests, facilitated the escape of thousands of former Nazis to Argentina, Brazil, and Chile. These networks moved SS officers, Gestapo agents, and collaborators who faced war crimes prosecution. Some escapees worked for intelligence services in their new countries. Others simply disappeared into civilian life. The rat lines operated with tacit approval from Western intelligence agencies who prioritized Cold War objectives over wartime justice. Not all German spies escaped consequences. Soviet forces captured thousands of German intelligence personnel on the Eastern Front. The NKVD, Soviet secret police, conducted mass executions of captured agents. Others were sent to Gulag labor camps in Siberia. Survival rates were low. The Soviets showed no interest in recruitment or leniency. German spies captured in Soviet-controlled territory faced execution or decades of imprisonment under brutal conditions. Thousands disappeared into the Soviet penal system and were never heard from again. The differing treatment of German intelligence personnel by Western and Soviet powers created a stark moral divide. Western agencies justified recruitment as pragmatic necessity. They argued that these men possessed irreplaceable expertise at a moment when Soviet aggression threatened European security. Critics countered that this was moral compromise dressed up as strategy. Men who had served Hitler's genocidal regime were rehabilitated, their crimes overlooked, their expertise purchased. The decision sent a message that intelligence value outweighed accountability for atrocities. The consequences of these choices extended for decades. Former Nazi intelligence officers embedded in Western agencies influenced Cold War policy, shaped perceptions of Soviet capabilities, and occasionally sabotaged operations on behalf of Moscow. The intelligence they provided was often mixed with disinformation. Their presence compromised the moral authority of Western democracies that claimed to stand for justice and human rights. When their wartime crimes eventually came to light in the 1970s and 1980s, public outrage erupted. Klaus Barbie was finally extradited from Bolivia in 1983 and tried in France. He was convicted of crimes against humanity in 1987 and sentenced to life imprisonment. He died in prison in 1991. The Gehlen organization's transformation into the BND institutionalized this moral compromise. For 2 decades, West Germany's primary intelligence service was run by men who had served the Third Reich. Their continued presence hindered efforts to confront Germany's Nazi past. It created networks of former Nazis who protected each other, obstructed denazification, and influenced West German politics. Only in the 1970s did a new generation of BND officers begin to systematically remove the remaining Nazi-era personnel. By then, the damage to the organization's credibility was irreversible. The story of German spies after World War II is not a story of justice or accountability. It is a story of strategic calculation, moral compromise, and the hard realities of geopolitical competition. The Allies faced a choice between prosecuting men who had served an evil regime and recruiting those same men to fight a new enemy. They chose recruitment. That choice shaped the Cold War, contaminated Western intelligence services, and delayed justice for victims of Nazi crimes. Some German spies paid with their lives in prison yards in London and Washington. But many more walked free, their expertise purchased, their crimes forgiven in the name of strategic necessity. The British executions at Wandsworth and Pentonville were swift and final. The firing squad at the Tower of London left no room for ambiguity, but these executions applied only to spies caught in the act during wartime. Once the shooting stopped, the calculus changed. The intelligence officers who had directed operations, analyzed reports, and run networks faced no such reckoning. They became assets, not criminals. Their knowledge was extracted, their services retained, their pasts quietly buried in classified files. The transformation happened not because their crimes were forgotten, but because their skills were needed. The Cold War made moral clarity impossible. Every recruitment of a former Nazi intelligence officer was a compromise. Every decision to shield them from prosecution was a choice to prioritize present security over past justice. Western intelligence agencies argued they had no choice, that the Soviet threat demanded pragmatism over principles. But the men they recruited were not passive technicians. They brought their ideologies, their networks, and their loyalties into new organizations. Some served faithfully, others betrayed their new masters as they had betrayed the old. The history of German spies after 1945 forces an uncomfortable question. If expertise is valuable enough, can any crime be overlooked? The answer Western intelligence agencies gave was yes. That answer shaped the post-war order, enabled war criminals to escape justice, and undermined the very principles the Allies claimed to defend. It was not a conspiracy. It was policy. It was discussed, approved, and implemented at the highest levels of government. And when the full scale of this recruitment became public decades later, it became clear that the war against Nazi Germany had not ended with victory. It had simply changed form. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.